Welcome to ASMR 400 for Found, whispered horror from haunted trailheads, like forest disappearances and creepy true stories. Subscribe now and don't look back. If you're reading this and thinking about hiking the Black Ridge Trailhead out near Grand Junction, if you're the kind of person who drives 5 hours just to see some godforsaken sun-baked overlook where the tourists don't go, I'm warning you. Now turn around, leave it. This story is not for the curious, it's for the desperate. It's for the kind of person who's already gone too far the first time I stepped onto that trail. I had no idea what I was walking into. I just wanted to disappear. For a while, get away from the city, get away from everything really. Somewhere without cell service, somewhere my name didn't materied. Found a post on an old hiking forum buried under 10 years of dead threads. Someone had uploaded a blurry map, half-hand drawn with GPS markers that didn't match any satellite view. Don't follow the ridgeline past marker 7 unless you're trying to leave more than footprints. That's what it said at the bottom. Someone had commented, "Not funny, man, my cousin never came back from that area," but no one else had replied. No updates, just silence. So naturally, I camped out at the McGinnis Canyons overnight and started at first light. The Black Ridge Trailhead wasn't even marked properly, no signs, just a dirt groove splitting from the main loop. I had to backtrack twice before I realized I'd passed it. A sun-bleached wooden post leaned at a crooked angle. No names, just a rusted nail and a faint arrow etched into the bark. Behind it, as if someone had tried to erase the path itself. The first few hours felt normal, dry sandstone cliffs, red dust choking my boots, a hawk screeching overhead, that silence between wind gusts where the world holds its breath. I passed a couple of hikers coming back, both older men with wide brim hats. They didn't say anything, they just looked at me with something like pity, as if they recognized. I had no idea what I was doing. Marker 7 was just a small stack of rocks painted blue on one side, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking. I sat down there, drank some lukewarm water, ate a granola bar, and stared out at the ridgeline. Ahead it didn't look like anything special, just a narrow ledge weaving along the cliff face. No ropes, no handrails, a sheer drop on one side, but something about it made my scalp tingle. It felt wrong, like a path made by something that didn't care if people could walk it still. I followed it about 20 minutes, and the landscape started to change. Less red rock, more black. The soil turned brittle, and the wind stopped completely. My ears popped like I'd changed altitude, but my GPS said I was still level. The sun felt farther away. The air tasted like copper. I heard something behind me, like footsteps on loose gravel. But when I turned, no, one eye kept walking faster. Now not sure why, just wanted to get past the ridgeline. Wanted to reach flat ground again, but the trail didn't flatten it, narrowed the next marker wasn't a rock. It was a spine-bleached white split at the base, wedged into a crevice like a flag. I touched it, and the moment I did, my head filled with the sound of buzzing. Not like bees, more like thousands of voices whispering all at once, layered and overlapping. Some chanting, some crying, some laughing, with no breath behind it. stumbled backward, tripped, cut my hand on a jagged edge. The blood soaked into the dirt like it had been waiting for it, not a trace left after a second, like the ground drank it. Should have turned back, I know that, but there was something ahead. I could see a shimmer like heat waves, but it wasn't hot, it was cold, and it pulsed in and out like something breathing through the canyon walls. Walked another mile, every step felt like I was sinking into something thicker than air, like the ground didn't want to let go of my boots. The silence was total, no birds, no wind, not even the sound of my own breath. I opened my mouth to say something just to break the tension, but no sound came out. My voice stayed in my chest, as if the trail had stolen its hand. Then I saw Ita, stone arch half buried in the cliff, carved with symbols that didn't make sense. Not language, not art, just spirals and lines that seemed to crawl. When I wasn't looking directly at them, there was a doorway beneath it, black as night, no shadow, no reflection, just void. There was something waiting inside. I felt it. I didn't see it, not yet, but it knew me. It knew my face, my memories, my regret. It wanted me, didn't walk in. I ran back the way I came, or I thought I did, but the trail had changed. The ridgeline twisted, the rocks shifted. There were no markers, no path, just walls that didn't match the map in my head. I kept running, lungs burning, legs shaking, but every time I turned a corner, the arch was there again, closer. It wasn't following me, I was circling it, orbiting like a moon caught in gravity. I couldn't escape. My water ran out. My flashlight flickered. My thoughts broke into static canned. Then I heard my own voice, not in my head. Not as a memory, but outside me, echoing off the canyon, saying things I never said, laughing in a tone I didn't recognize, weeping in my childhood voice, screaming my name like my mother used to. When I was lost in the grocery store, that's when I knew I'd stepped into somewhere else. Not a cave, not a canyon, something older, something beneath, and it didn't want me to leave. I stopped running, couldn't keep my legs under me. My body folded into the dust like it was supposed to kneel here. Like the ground had been carved in my shape. I crawled under a ledge, my back to the stone, facing outward with shaking breath. I tried to close my eyes, but I couldn't, because every time I blinked I saw the arch, even in the dark, not burned into my vision, burned into my thoughts. Pulled out my phone, no bars, of course. The screen wouldn't even light up, just flickered like it was underwater. I stayed there until I started hearing it. Again the voice, my voice, but wrong, too smooth, too slow. Like someone pretending to be me, after only watching me for a few minutes. Like it had the tone, but none of the solid was calling calm. Tell. And cold words drawn out like dripping oil. Come see what was carved for you, what has waited since the first footstep on this stone, what remembers your name though you've never spoken it. And then it was silent, again, not just quiet silent. Even my heartbeat felt distant, muted, like I was underwater or buried deep, where pressure made time move slower. I tried to stand. My legs shook like twigs in wind, but I moved step by step, scraping my boots against the stone to remind myself I was still above ground, still really don't remember how long. I wandered hours, days, maybe it felt like. I moved through endless folds in the canyon that weren't there. On any map, places the sun didn't touch, walls too smooth to be natural carved. With those same impossible spirals, they pulsed, not with light, but with memory. I touched one, and I saw a man standing naked in the same spot. But he was old, older than he should have been, skin like parchment, eyes hollow, and he smiled when he saw me. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then he turned to ash and blew apart. I screamed, but again no sound. I moved on deeper. The next chamber was wide like an open cathedral, but carved by no hands. The walls curved inward, covered in faces, not sculpted. Real, pressed into the stone, like something had forced them through screaming. Some with open mouths, some with closed eyes, some looking right at me. Fell hands over my ears, not because they were loud, but because I could feel them thinking they weren't dead. They were trapped. This place fed on memory, on self, on whatever you thought made you human. It unspooled it, bit by bit, until nothing was left but your shy pie. Had to keep moving. I had to find a way out. I thought maybe if I climbed, got back to a ridge, I could see the way I came. I scraped my way up a narrow crack, climbing with bleeding fingers, until I reached a ledge that overlooked the chamber. There it was, again the arch, but it had changed, was larger, breathing flesh and stone moving together like muscled under bone, something inside it now. Not shadow, not air, but motion, slow swaying, like something was waiting to step through. I heard footsteps behind me, soft bare feet on sandy, turned, expecting another vision. But it was a girl maybe. Tan, dirty blonde hair, sunken cheeks, barefoot in a ragged dress. She looked at me without blinking. Then she spoke. "You're too loud, you woke it up. You shouldn't be here. None of us should have come." I asked who she was, but my mouth still didn't work. The words just echoed in my head. She walked to the edge of the ledge, looked down at the arch and sat cross-legged. They always come back here, even when they don't mean to, because once it knows your name, you belong to it. She turned to me again. "You think you're the first, but you're just next." I reached out to her, not sure why, not thinking really, but my hand passed through her like mist and she vanished. The ledge cracked beneath me, landed in a pool, not water, not mud. Something thicker like blood and oil mixed with glass. I pulled myself out, gasping. Covered in it, my skin burned. My mind felt scrambled like a radio station between signals. Above me in the stone, etched deeper than anything else I saw. My own name, not carved recently, not scratched in panic. It was old, weathered, eroded by time. Like it had been waiting for me all along, like I had always been coming here, and the arch, now pulsing, was opening. I didn't run anymore. There was nowhere to run, only directions that led me back to the same thing, no matter which way I turned, no matter how many ledges I climbed, no matter how many prayers I screamed into the soundless dark. That arch kept reappearing, always closer, always changed. It was no longer just stone. It breathed now. It pulsed with memory. It oozed things. I didn't want to see hands growing like roots from the base, pulling dirt upward, faces stretching through the surface like they were trying to be born but never fully were. It was growing, and I realized every time someone like me wandered too far, every time someone crossed marker 7, this thing grew. It didn't just feed on us. It used us, our fears, our memories, our pasts. We were the architecture that... Next time I saw her, the barefoot girl, she was hanging upside down from the ceiling, not suspended, just standing there, as if gravity meant nothing. Here she stared at me without blinking. "You're almost done now," she said. "I watched you from the beginning. I thought maybe you'd turn back. They always hope someone will, but you didn't. You just kept walking." I asked her again who she was, why. I kept seeing her why. "Me this time," she answered. "I'm the first," she whispered. "I found this place long before they marked the trail, before the maps, before the stories, before the forest swallowed the warning signs." She dropped from the ceiling, but landed soundlessly, like a feather that forgot it was supposed to be light. I didn't mean to open it. I was just a kid. I thought it was a cave, but it saw me. And now I stay watching, guiding, warning the ones who still have a chance. I asked her if I still had one. She tilted her head. "Maybe, but you'll have to give something back. You took too much with you when you came in." I didn't understand, but she was already gone again, and the chamber had changed. There were stairs, now spiraling downward, cut from a stone, blacker than night steps that curved in ways my eyes couldn't follow, sometimes up, sometimes inward, sometimes into themselves. But I followed because what else could I do every step down? I lost something. I don't mean items, I mean parts of me. The sound of my father's voice, the taste of my favorite food, the image of my dog's face. Memories peeled away gently, reverently, as if the place was carving a sculpture from my mind eye. Tried to hold on, tried to think of my name, but it slipped through my thoughts like sand, through broken fingers. Then I reached the bottom land. The arch was there again, final now. No longer stone at all. It was flesh-ribbed and pulsing, like the inside of something ancient, waiting to birth a new idea. And in its center was not darkness, but reflection. I saw myself, but it wasn't me, not anymore. It had my shape, my face, my old clothes, but its eyes were hollow, and it smiled to wide. It spoke without moving its mouth. "You have arrived. You are ready. We remember you now." I fell to my knees, begged, pleaded, screamed silently, reached toward me, and I did the only thing I could die. Stepped forward, not into the arch, but beside it, into the walls, into the spirals. Let the canyon take me on. In that moment I understood this place wasn't a prison. It was a body, a living memory. Bao who had come, a consciousness built on fear, on trauma, on lost. The trail wasn't cursed. It was intentional. It was bait because something deep beneath Colorado, older than stone, older than language, wanted to be remembered, and it needed minds to carry its name. I woke up 3 days later in the emergency ward of a small Grand Junction clinic. No ID, no phone, nothing on me but red dust and dried blood. They said I'd been found by a couple of trail surveyors, wandering barefoot through the scrub, screaming a name that didn't match any language. I didn't tell them what I saw. I couldn't bet. I'm not sure it's over, not when I dream and see the arch still growing, not when my reflection sometimes doesn't move with me, not when my voice sometimes sounds just a little too slow. Don't hike anymore. I don't even leave the city, but sometimes when the wind is just right, when my window is open and the lights are off, hear Hertha, barefoot girl, whispering, there's always another hiker, always another name to remember, and I pray to whatever's left of me that I wasn't the one who let it out. If you're ever hiking through the Allegheny backcountry, and you see a trail carved into the forest that dips down into what looks like black rock and mist, if it smells like iron and moss, and sounds like it's breathing when you stop walking, don't take another step, don't even breathe, just turn back quietly, don't look into the trees, and don't ask what's watching you from under the roots, because there's a place out here, a trailhead, not listed on any map, carved out like be an old scar down into the Sleep Caverns. And if you see it, you've already gone too far. I first heard about the Sleep Caverns Trail from my Uncle Johnny. He was a volunteer firefighter who used to spend weekends hiking into remote parts of the Alleghenies looking for kids or campers who got lost or went dark on their radios. He told me once, in a voice too low for anyone else to hear, that there was a place he wouldn't go back to, not even in full gear with backup on radio and lights. On full, he never swore in front of me, but I remember the way his hand shook when he whispered, I saw something down there, and I didn't bring it out with me, but I think it followed me back when I turned 25 and quit my city job to go off and start an overlanding YouTube channel. I remembered his story, and something about that trail crawled back up my spine, like a chill from a bad dream, and I got the idea in my head that maybe, just maybe, I'd find the Sleep Caverns Trail for myself, pair and film the descent, no matter what was down there. Spent 6 weeks researching everything I could find about lost hikers in the Alleghenies, specifically anywhere around Fork Hill and Marlowe's Gap. I followed dead-end posts on abandoned forums, read archived Facebook groups for hikers in Pennsylvania. Most were gone or filled with old wives. Tales 1 stood out, though it was a post from 2009 by someone who called themselves Watchaceda73, who claimed they found a trail near Devil's Hinge that dropped them into a gorge that hadn't been there the day before. The post ended mid-sentence with the words, "Don't listen to the wind when it speaks your name." That should have stopped me, but I was already gone by then. I parked my truck off a service road near a fire tower that hadn't been in use since 1978. According to the rusted-out signage, the map I downloaded ended just before a sharp dip in the landscape, but I noticed a thin animal trail winding between ferns and shade. Along the edge of a slope, I stepped past the edge, and instantly the forest changed. The trees got taller, thicker, older, like they'd been growing since before people named things, and they leaned over the trail like they were watching me from above. Every time I looked up, the light was dimmer than it should have been, even though it was midday. And I didn't hear any birds, not a single insect either. Just my boots crunching on wet earth and the sound of breath that wasn't mine behind me. Just out of reach. After about an hour, I found the trailhead. It wasn't marked, not with a sign or paint, just a sharp cut in the forest, where the moss peeled back and the dirt turned to black stone and mist rose in thin spirals from below like something exhaling through ancient teeth carved deep into the mountain. And it wasn't fog exactly. It had weight to it, like it wanted to cling to my skin. And my eyes watered as I stepped closer. Shouldn't have gone down, but I did. The first 20 steps were slick and uneven, carved into the rock-like stairs, but shallow enough to make every footfall uncertain. Then came the opening. A hollowed-out mouth of cavern, ringed with wet ferns, and something that looked like old bones in the stone. The light didn't reach past the edge. I had a flashlight and backup batteries. I clicked it on and saw what I wish I hadn't. Walls weren't natural. They were ribbed like the inside of a throat and glistened as if alive. The ceiling pulsed once slowly, as if something deep below was breathing. And when I stepped inside, the noise of the forest vanished. All I heard was the slow, steady drip of water, and the whisper of something far off calling my name in my own voice. The deeper I went, the more wrong. The air became, it smelled like old copper and stagnant water with something underneath, something like rot or meat left. Too long in the sun, my light flickered not from the batteries dying, but from something moving just ahead of me fast enough. I never saw more than a blur, but slow enough to always stay just out of reach. I marked my path with chalk, but each time I turned to check my markings, they were gone. Sometimes replaced with what looked like scratches, other times with symbols I didn't recognize, loops and eyes and teeth carved into the stone, like warnings or invitations, or both. Then I heard it not. A voice, exactly, more like the memory of a voice, like something I'd heard in a dream, whispering from behind my teeth, and it said, "Permission to be here, but I couldn't leave, not because I didn't want to, but because the path behind me wasn't the same anymore. The walls had shifted, the tunnel branched where it hadn't before, and when I backtracked, I found dead ends, or worse, bloops that led me back to the same spot again and again. And every time I returned, there was more writing on the walls, and my name appeared in the stone-etched carved. Bleeding, I started to lose track of time. My watch stopped at 4:17, and the second hand just ticked in place. My flashlight stayed on longer than any battery should have, and yet the shadows only grew deeper, and I kept hearing my own footsteps behind me even when I stood stilly. Found the first body 2 days in, I think it was. Hard to tell. It was a woman, or had been once. Her face was peeled off like a mask and nailed to the wall behind her, and her hands were missing, but her eyes were still open, and I swear to God they moved when I passed, and her mouth tried to form words. Her throat made a sound like someone drowning, and Ronnie ran for what felt like hours. I didn't stop until I hit a place where the tunnel opened into a cavern that looked like a cathedral, if it had been built from roots and bone and despair. And hanging from the ceiling were hundreds of people strung up, like puppets or meat, or both, and every single one turned their head toward me and smiled. And I realized they weren't dead, not all the way they were dreaming, and I had entered the place where dreams come to die. Was the Sleep Caverns. Don't know what made me stay. Maybe it was the pull of something beneath the stone. Or maybe it was because, once you hear the caverns breathe, your own breath starts to match its rhythm. And you belong to it now like marrow. Two boni found a place to rest near an old campsite. Someone else had left a rusted tin cup and a journal half burned. The first entry read, "If you find this and you're still alive, go back now." The last entry. "Just," said I, see myself watching me from the dark eye. Started writing in the margins to keep myself sane, but the ink would vanish overnight and be replaced with drawings of my own face, split down the middle like something had opened me up and looked inside and found something wanting. The worst part wasn't the noise or the silence. It was the song, low and constant, and growing louder the deeper. I went a lullaby in a language I didn't know but felt in my bones like an ache or a promise, and every time I heard it, I felt closer to whatever was singing and farther from myself. Found another tunnel, smaller, narrower, filled with markings and what looked like old photos of hikers. Their eyes scratched out, their mouths torn wide and below. Them the same word repeated over and over. Stay. Didn't want to, but I kept walking because once you hear your own voice begging you to stop and you don't, there's no going back. And I'd already left pieces of myself behind in those walls, pieces that whispered and laughed and waited for me. The caverns didn't sleep, but they wanted you to. They whispered in voices that curled round your spine and pulled you down, not with force, but with something worse. Comfort, a lullaby in the dark, the smell of your mother's skin when you were too young to understand. Fear, something ancient and familiar and wrong, all at one side. Started hearing footsteps again this time. They didn't echo from behind me. They matched mine perfectly. Then they stopped when I stopped, but only for a while. And then they kept going past me into the tunnel ahead, as if someone had stepped out of my skin and continued forward, dragging the last of my soul with them. The air felt thicker, like breathing syrup or ash, the kind that coats your teeth and makes your eyes water. My flashlight dimmed, not from power loss, but as if the darkness had grown hungry and was now feeding on the light. It reached for me like fingers brushing the edge of my jacket. I kept moving because stopping felt worse, like if I paused. Even once the walls would close in and never let me go, I found a room locked. A cavern, not a chamber. A room with tile floors and peeling wallpaper and an old radio. Buzzing static in the corner, like I'd stepped into someone's basement, but wrong. The proportions were off, the walls were too tall, and the door frames too thin, and there was a child's tricycle, rusted and covered in moss, sitting in the center of the room, as if it had been waiting. The wallpaper peeled back in one corner, and underneath wasn't drywall, it was skin pale, and pulsing and covered in names. Scratched with fingernails, mine was there, spelled out perfectly in letters that bled when I touched them. I didn't scream, not because I wasn't afraid, but because I knew something was listening, and I didn't want it to know where I was. I moved on. The tunnel changed again, this time narrower, but filled with lanterns, flickering low blue flame-like bioluminescence, except they smelled like kerosene and olive. Them swung in unison, as if stirred by breath, not wind, and the further I walked, the more the walls began to move like muscle flexing around me. The sound of wet grinding stone behind my ears. I passed a mirror, just one standing perfectly in the center. But a small alcove, and I made the mistake of looking into it. My reflection didn't blink, didn't breathe, and then it smiled and walked away without me. The mirror cracked when I looked away, and behind it was a tunnel I hadn't seen before, one carved not by nature or water or erosion, but by hands, sharp-clawed and deliberate, and I followed it because by then I wasn't choosing anymore. I was being drawn, pulled like blood, toward an old wound that never healed. I found the second body. It wasn't fresh, it wasn't whole, either just parts strung up like ornaments. Ribs spread wide like wings, and something carved into the sternum like a sigil or brand. And it hummed when I stepped near, not in sound, but in vibration, low in my chest, like an echo from something buried deeper, something old. I remember vomiting, not just food, but pieces of memory, things I didn't know. I'd forgotten names, faces, dreams. They poured out of me in a thick black bile that shimmered on the floor and formed words. Asleep, the tunnel ended at a staircase. It wasn't carved, it was built, iron steps, bolted into stone, slick with condensation that smelled like rot and flowers, and I descended with one hand on the rail and the other clutching my light like a lifeline. Even though it barely cut through the dark anymore, at the bottom was a room full of beds, hundreds of them rusting, metal frames with rotting mattresses and curled bodies beneath thin blankets, and I knew without seeing their faces that they weren't dead. They were dreaming, and I'd joined them even if I was still walking. Something inside me had already laid down, that moved as I passed, fingers twitching, mouths opening just enough to whisper my name, not in fear or warning, but in welcome. One bump of them reached out, and I felt the cold of it through my jacket, the burn of fingers that hadn't moved in decades, and it said, "Done. T. Leave, not out loud, not with sound, but in my thoughts, pressed there like a thumb against wet clay. Ran again this time, not because I was afraid, but because I could feel something waking up, and I didn't want to be here when it opened its eyes there. Walls began to shake, dust rained down from above, and the tunnel behind me collapsed in a slow yawn of stone and shadow, and I kept running until I found another chamber, this one filled with statues of people, mid-scream, all of them facing the same direction, all of them posed as if trying to run and failing, and I knew they hadn't been carved. They'd been frozen, caught in the moment between breath and death, and sleep. I passed them, quickly whispering apologies as I went because it felt wrong not to, and some of them moved in response. Not much, just a twitch of the hand or a slight tilt of the head, but enough to let me know they were aware, and they were watching. The floor sloped downward, again always down deeper, into something that didn't end, that couldn't end. And the further I went, the less I felt like myself. My thoughts slowed, my memories blurred. I started forgetting my own name and replacing it with something older, something the stone whispered in my ear. The lullaby returned louder, now almost musical, but wrong. off-key, in a way that scraped against my nerves and made my teeth ache and my eyes water, and I realized it wasn't a song, it was a summoning, and I was the offering. I felt not far just enough to land hard on something soft, something that squirmed and shifted under me like a mass of worms or hair or limbs. I couldn't tell, I didn't look. I crawled forward and reached a ledge that opened into a pit so vast my light couldn't reach the bottom, and I heard it breathes low, heavy, like the mountain itself, exhaling, and then I heard my uncle's voice, not calling for help, warning me, but singing the lullaby softly, lovingly, and behind his voice were others, dozens, hundreds, all singing, all calling me deeper, and I wept because part of me wanted to go. I don't remember how long I stood there at the ledge. Maybe it was hours, maybe it was minutes. Time was a thing I'd left behind somewhere near the surface, or maybe it had left me. I listened to the breathing of the mountain, the way it pulled air in and held it like lungs that had waited centuries for a reason to rise, and every exhale pushed warmth up from the pit like the belly of something dreaming. I took one step forward, then another, and the edge crumbled beneath my boots. I didn't fall, sank. The air grew thick like syrup. The mist curled around my arms, my throat. I couldn't see anything anymore. I felt the world slide around me, the way fingers pull soft earth away from bone, and then I was somewhere else, not underground, not anymore. It was like I'd been inverted, turned inside out, and poured into a dream that didn't belong to NIT. Looked like a town, one I'd never seen before, but knew instantly. Every building crooked, every window open, every porch swing rocking in a wind I couldn't feel, and every single house had the same address etched into the door, burned into the wood. I walked the streets, and they stretched with me like I'd been there forever, and every corner I turned brought me back to the same place, an intersection where the street signs had my parents' names etched in rust, and the stop sign blinked the word sleep over and over in dim pulses of ready. Opened the door to one of the houses. Inside was my childhood bedroom, perfectly preserved, except everything was a little too tall, a little too narrow. Like someone had recreated it from memory and got the scale just wrong. The bed was neatly made, the closet door was ajar, and I could hear something breathing on the other side. I just sat down because it felt right, because I didn't want to disturb the thing behind the closet door, but I heard footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, like someone who knew the exact number of boards that creaked, and I turned toward the hallway and saw myself standing there, older, taller, thinner, eyes sunken and mouth stitched shut with wire, and I knew he'd been walking these halls long before I arrived, waiting for me. He raised his hand, and the stitching came undone, and the dream nound. The house disappeared, and I was back in the caverns, but not the same ones. These were deeper, darker, more ancient. The stone was no longer stone. It was teeth, it was scales, it was skin, stretched over the bones of the world, and I walked through it barefoot, without knowing when I'd lost my boots, without knowing why I was bleeding from my hands, or why my blood wasn't red anymore. There were things moving around me, not shadows, memories, with legs, with mouths, with hunger, they whispered. Secrets I hadn't lived yet, things I would do, things I had done, things I could never undo. And they laughed in voices that sounded like everyone I'd ever loved. I came to a throne built from ribs and lanterns and jawbones. Sitting on it was a figure tall and thin and wrapped in cloth that shifted like fog. Its face was a mirror. I saw myself again, not as I was, but as I would be if I stayed, if I let go on. He asked without words, "Do you want to sleep?" Said yes, before I understood what I meant. The ground opened beneath me and I fell again, this time into water thick and black and warm like oil. I swam not toward the surface, but down, because the lullaby was stronger. There, because the voices were clearer, because the song was mine. Now I found the source, a heart the size of a car beating slowly at the center of the world, and wrapped around it were bodies sleeping, dreaming, melting into it, becoming part of it. And I understood then that the sleep caverns weren't a place, they were a choice to surrender, become dream, to feed the thing that wit's eye touched the heart, and it opened, and inside was every version of me that had ever chosen differently. The me that turned back, the me that screamed, the me that begged. They stared at me in silence, and behind them stood the figure from the throne, still watching, still waiting. Turned away. I ran somehow, somewhere. Ronnie, don't remember the path, just the feeling of stone breaking beneath me, of wind rushing past skin that didn't feel like mine anymore, of light so distant it was a wound in the dark, and I clawed toward it, crawled, fought, screamed until I broke the surface, until I saw trees again, till I saw the sky. Collapsed on the forest floor just beyond the trailhead, gasping, bleeding, sobbing. The trail was gone, no mist, no black stone, just dirt and ferns and wind through the pines, but the whisper was still their soft, patient singing. Guy made it back to my truck. I don't know how I drove. I don't remember starting the engine. I just remember pulling into a gas station 30 miles down the road and realizing I had no reflection in the rearview mirror. Came back hours later, but it wasn't the same. My eyes were older. My mouth moved before I spoke, and at night I still hear the song faint through the cracks in the window, calling me back. I don't sleep much anymore, but when I dream of that heart still beating, still waiting, and I know one day I'll return, not because I want to, but because part of me never left.